Hi, Human Physiology class. This is Mr. Yago, and we're going to look at Chapter 10, Digestive System today, starting out with Section 10.1, looking at the general characteristics of the digestive system, its structure, its function, and it's something that we call the alimentary canal, which is essentially, if you see here, how food enters and passes all the way down through all of these organs and then out. Okay? We'll also be looking in Section 10.2, mouth to stomach, the accessory organs in 10.3, such as things like the liver, and how the small and large intestine, which are down here, works. To this point, it would be great if you guys could take a second on the website and find the crash course on the digestive system. Again, I know some of you utilize the information in this video. It is helpful to give a little idea of what's to expect and how this system operates. So please take some time and watch that video at some point during the course of this unit. Alright, this is just your friendly reminder for vocabulary development. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 terms, so a little less than last time, that are essentially just going to help you better prepare and understand this system. So make sure you get this into flashcards or some sort of device, and that way you can study them. So let's look at the general function of the digestive system. And the goal is to essentially use two types of methods to break down foods. And we have mechanical and chemical breakdown. Now I want you to think in your mind, if based off of what you know about the digestive system in terms of its mouth, its esophagus, stomach, intestines, what areas would utilize mechanical and what areas would utilize chemical? Okay, and once we have broken the food down, usually, hopefully, as it makes its way into the intestines, broken down into the chemicals of or molecules of life, we are prepared for absorption. And absorption is essentially going to take the nutrients out of our foods and put it into the bloodstream, where our circulatory system, which we just got finished talking about, will distribute that to all of the cells. Now, what is the structure? What does this system consist of? And that's where we bring in this word, the alimentary canal, which is basically the passage of food from mouth to anus, as well as bypassing all the accessory organs on the way. Now notice that this is 9 meters long. That's 27 feet, okay? Just to give you a little bit of an idea of how far it is. So when you put food in your mouth, it's going to travel 9 meters and eventually exit the body. So what are some of these organs that we're going to deal with in this alimentary canal? Well, for starters, all food hopefully enters the mouth. From there, it'll move down to the esophagus. We have the pharynx here, which is the back of the throat. Not too big of a deal, but pharynx versus larynx is a little bit different. Larynx is our voice box. Pharynx is just basically the back of the throat there. As you can see, this one's pointing to that. Food will move down the esophagus, which is a tube. And that tube is made out of smooth muscle, and we'll go through something called peristalsis in order to help get food down. So if you ever had one of those hard swallows where you didn't have enough, say, liquid, you can kind of feel that food go all the way down to the bottom into the stomach. So once it reaches the stomach, it'll then bounce out into the small intestine, which we'll talk about in more detail. It does have 3 parts. And we'll also look at the large intestine, as you can see here, and we'll break it into some parts as well. And then food will exit out of or actually waste. We have absorbed all the nutrients, exit out of the anal canal or the anus. Okay? So these are essentially the major organs that we're going to deal with, and we will go into more depth in each of these sections to come. All right, some major terms that we have to understand. Now, this is really diving in on a very deep level into the structure of the wall of the alimentary canal. I really want you to envision the alimentary canal as a system of tubes, okay? Very similar like if you were at Noah's Ark and you go down a completely enclosed tube slide. That's what we're dealing with. And what we're going to talk about is what is in the wall of this tube, okay? Now, there are 4 terms I'm going to throw at you, and each term, or basically section or layer of this wall, has a certain structure and function. First one we're going to talk about is the mucosa, or the mucous membrane, and that's going to protect the tissues and help carry out absorption. So if we were labeling these from superficial to deep, This one would actually be the most superficial, okay? And this wouldn't be deep. This is essentially when you eat food, the mucosa is what the food is going to come in contact with. So that mucus is actually going to help food travel down those canals much easier, hence protecting the tissues. So if you've ever had that instance where you maybe ate a Dorito or something like that, or a chip, and it went down the throat the wrong way, kind of felt like you were chewing down glass, that mucus is going to help protect the tissue and kind of carry out that process. Next in line, if we're moving out to the superficial layers, we have the submucosa. It's going to contain glands, the blood vessels that are going to run around it, lymphatic vessels, which are essentially going to be helping the immune system, as well as nerves. Okay. Next, we have the muscular layer. Remember, I told you previously that the alimentary canal of the digestive system is most definitely smooth muscle. And they also have what we call circular and longitudinal fibers, and that's going to really help to push the food. All right, we'll talk about peristalsis more in a little bit, but that's what that muscular is. And then finally, the most superficial layer, the serosa, is the visceral peritoneum. It's essentially the outer covering. Remember, the word visceral is speaking to internal organs, but it's going to cover the tube. It's going to moisten and lubricate it. These tubes move, okay? A lot of times as you push food through, that tube is not stationary. It has a little bit of give to it. And if you've ever gotten an abdominal check by a doctor where they're kind of pushing around in your abdomen and lower abdomen, that stuff moves. So the serose layer is going to moisten and lubricate that so that it can move with the body. All right, on this slide, it just gives you a little bit of an idea of what this looks like. And I would like you to draw a very, very simple picture and just label the words that we went through, okay? Now, remember we said the mucosa is the most deepest layer, and then the serosa is the superficial. So I did my best to color the slide before, but the mucosa, as you can see, has lots of surface area. That's a structure and function category that we're going to speak to when we go through absorption. Note after that we have the submucosal layer, which is this white cells here. Then we have the muscular layer, which is pretty obvious. It's red. All right. And also notice, sorry, one more thing on the submucosa. Notice that we have red and blue, red and blue, red and blue, red and blue. That is the blood vessels that runs through the submucosa. Okay. We'd also have some nerves in here as well. And then finally, this outer layer kind of looks like simple squamous epithelium. That is the serosa. Okay, so that's going to go all the way around. So this picture should at least show the different layers, the thickness. As you can see, the top layer is very thin. And also make sure you definitely look at the mucosa and how it is basically folded. Okay, and again, we'll speak to that more when we talk more about absorption. So, how does food move through the body? Now, in a little bit, we're going to talk about peristalsis or peristaltic contractions, where essentially, if you wanted to, you could stand on your head, like we have here, and you can try this at home if you want. You might need a partner to help you. Make sure your neck is braced, but you could stand completely on your head, and someone could feed you food, let's say maybe a banana, and you would chew it upside down, and that food would actually travel up against gravity. Okay, and that's due to the fact that there's smooth muscle in there. All right, and if we take a look at the picture over here, you can see that it would travel up the esophagus and into the stomach. Now, I don't recommend standing on your head for a long period of time, but if you really wanted to test this, you could eat something. I would recommend corn because your body doesn't do a good job digesting it. And you could sit there for probably 24 to 48 hours, and that corn would move through there and eventually come out that end. Now, the only problem is once it comes out that end, gravity will truly affect it, and it might come back down. But now you have a little bit of an idea of how that food can move. It can actually move against gravity, and we call that peristalsis. We'll talk about that more later. All right, so here we go. Movements of the tubes. Okay, we have mixing movements and we have propelling movements. Mixing movements is where we contract and squeeze the muscle, and that'll mix the food. This is going to be found most notably in the stomach, okay, as well as a little bit in the small intestines, where we're going to break some things down. And it is a rhythmic contraction. Unfortunately, I can't show you this video. I'm going to do my best when I'm in class to show you this video, but it's speaking to this peristalsis. This is an endoscopy looking down your esophagus. And notice that right here is kind of a ring. Imagine there was a plug of food, like you see here, We call that a bolus. And that food is just being slowly pushed down, kind of a wave action. All right, that would be a propelling movement. Notice that it's in a ring. It's a ring of muscles that will contract. So you can really see it in this picture here, how we have relaxation, contraction, food, and it will slowly push its way down. Okay, now again, that's speaking to that muscular layer that's found within this alimentary canal, and it's responsible for pushing the food through the body. All right, on to your favorite stuff, the anatomy. This is really important for two reasons. One, it deals with the digestive system, and I want you to know it. But two, it's really going to help our discussion when Dr. Hiley speaks at our class towards the end of this unit, because this is essentially how he diagnoses patients. His specialty is going to be the GI tract, which is gastrointestinal. That's what that stands for. But when you obviously are not going to have a view looking at yourself right now like this, we're covered with skin and muscle and bone. So one of the things that Dr. Hiley will do is he'll have you as a patient describe the location of your pain. And notice that in this class, we have our anatomical right and left. So let me ask you a question right now, based off of this picture here. If you came into the doctor's office and you were complaining of right upper quadrant pain, the doctor would look at that area and go, okay, well, what's up in this right upper quadrant? Well, we have things like the liver and the gallbladder, a small portion of the small intestine, we'll call that the duodenum, and the common bile duct. Now, when coming into Dr. Hiley's office, I'm going to tell you that 9 times out of 10, if you have right upper quadrant pain, he's going to jump right to the gallbladder, okay, which is a really small, tiny gland that sits underneath the liver. That's responsible for secreting something called bile, and it can get inflamed, and it can be removed, and you can live without that. So he would definitely be looking into that as a possible solution. Now, if he said you came into the doctor's office and were complaining of right lower quadrant pain, take a look and see what's in the right lower quadrant. What do you maybe think would be a very common thing that people get removed, and Dr. Hiley does a lot of these? It is not the rectum. It is actually the appendix. As you can see here, appendix kind of sticks out at the end of the large intestine. Excuse me, it's actually kind of the beginning of it. Small intestine will empty into it. And again, not quite sure. It doesn't have that big of a responsibility in the body, something you can live without. But if you had some issues there, he would be pulling that out. So get to know what is in these quadrants. A majority of the stuff is on the right side, as you can see here. But there are a few things that we may deal with in the left upper quadrant as well. So now I would like to kind of have you guys take an opportunity to jot down, hey, what are those organs that are involved in each of these quadrants? This is going to give you a really good idea of how to locate the anatomy. And essentially, it's going to make your life a lot easier when you look at this picture on a test. So right upper quadrant, jot what you see down there. Left upper quadrant, jot what you see down there, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to do that now before you move on to the next slide. So feel free to pause this if you'd like right now. All right, last but not least, we're done taking notes through this section. I appreciate your time. Digestive system, I got a couple questions that I want you to ponder. Question number 1 is the digestive system has 2 ways that it breaks down food. What are those 2 ways? So take a second to think about that a little bit. If you want, pause the video, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you right now. So the 2 ways that we break down food are mechanical and chemical breakdown. Okay, and we might call that mechanical and chemical digestion. That might be another way to do that as well. We'll get into a lot more detail of where we're going to find that, but for right now, I want you to know that we do have 2 ways to break things down. Question number 2, explain the difference between the mucosa, submucosa, muscular layer, and serous layer. Now here's some things that I want you to know the difference. A, where is it located in the body? What one's superficial? What one's deep? How are they layered in order? What are the functions of these specific layers? Okay, so I'm not really going to explain this one because essentially you can just pop back in your notes and do that. But make sure you take an opportunity to study this because these are easy questions for me to ask. Like, what's the function of the submucosa? Where's the serous layer found? Order these in order from deep to superficial, like I do on pretty much every test. So take an opportunity to familiarize yourself, and if you were taking notes properly, you should have a picture and you should have a definition. Now, Finally, the last thing I want to talk about is peristalsis. Now, I didn't really define it as well on that slide, but essentially that is the movement of food through the body. Remember, we have a rhythmic and we have a propelling motion, and that's where we utilize that peristalsis. So make sure in your notes that you've put down that that's what peristalsis means. All right, that's all I have for this first section. We'll dive into more in section 10.2. Thank you very much for your time. Yago out.